Hi there. Welcome to this episode of the Cutting Room Floor. This is a segment where I can dig a little bit deeper into a recent message here at Sunny Slope Church, and we can explore something that maybe we just don't have time to get to in a message. And this lets us kind of follow a rabbit trail for a little bit. This past week, we looked at a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, this is probably one of the most well-known, or at least one of the most, it's one of the most expansive passages that we have that explains the meaning of the resurrection for believers. Throughout the passage, what Paul is really doing, he's trying to give a defense or an explanation for the resurrection. He gives his reason for believing in the resurrection. And then he moves into a section then where he tries to show the benefits of the resurrection. Now, buried in there in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 29, there's this really strange verse where Paul says this, and I'll just read it out of my NIV Bible. In chapter 15, verse 29, Paul says this: "Now, if there is no resurrection, then what will those do who are baptized for the dead?" What will those do who are baptized for the dead? And if you actually read in the ESV, it reads a little bit differently, but it still gets at the same thing. Otherwise, this is the ESV. Otherwise, what do people mean by being baptized on behalf of the dead? What is Paul talking about there? What is he referring to? A couple things that maybe are helpful grammatically. The word baptized there, it's a present active participle, which suggests that this was an ongoing action. What do people mean being baptized for the dead? So this was not, that clues us in that in all likelihood, this was not an activity that was happening once in a great while or had happened in the past, but rather the opposite. This was an ongoing practice in the Corinthian church, which leads to the question, well, what were they practicing and why? Now, strictly speaking, the answer there is, well, it's really hard to know. We know that in some way people were being baptized for the dead. Whatever that practice was, it's not well attested anywhere else in the New Testament. There are no instances of this occurring, no references to it anywhere else in the New Testament, and it's not very well attributed outside of the New Testament. There are really no significant references outside of New Testament sources that would maybe help us understand what this ancient practice was all about. So we're left to speculate on exactly what this means. The meaning of the practice, or what the practice actually was, really depends on two main words. I'm going to pull it up here. I'll share my screen here, and then that way you'll be able to see just what I'm referring to here. You can see here, hopefully you can see on my screen. I'm going to move this out of the way. If you look in the Greek, here's the word baptizomenoi. That's one of the words, and then the other word is this small little word here, hooper. Let's stop our annotations here. Over on so two main Greek words, and I suppose we could throw in one more. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to add this one as well, where Paul actually talks about necron. We hear in that necrosis, which is that's the English word. Necrosis comes from the Greek necron, which is a way of referring to the dead, or to death, physical death, and that'll be important in just a minute. Now, most people watching this, you maybe have a little familiarity with Greek, but maybe not. And so to use a really old, tired, and not very funny joke, it's all Greek to you. But let's see if we can interpret this just a little bit. I'm going to pull up a different screen here. I'll stop sharing this screen. And I'm going to put up a, whoops, there we go. I'm going to put up a different screen. And this screen is going to give you, let's start with this. You should be able to see here that first word that we highlighted. The word is hooper. And the way this little thing here works, it's kind of handy. I'll show you how it works and how it applies. This is from Logos Bible software. What it really does is it just gives you the word that you're looking at right here in the middle, and then it gives you all these possible interpretations around the wheel. And what you can actually do is you can click on any of those words, and then it'll give you the occurrence where that word shows up. So, oops. If we so if we're not annotating anymore, if we just do this, you can see down here it gives you all the different words, and it tells you that 98 out of 150 times the word hooper is translated as the word for. So that's just that's how that works. But what I want to draw your attention to is that this word almost all the time means for. So hooper means for, and then the other kind of related translation is on behalf of, and that's how you get the word on and behalf of. So most of the time, out of all the 150 times that the word occurs in the New Testament, 98 of them it's translated for, and then you can throw a few more in there 6 times. So up to 104 times it comes as on, and then 7. So it's 130. We're up to about 109 times it is translated as for, or on behalf of. You'd probably want to throw in of there as well. Anyway, so you get the sense that this is the vast majority of times that word hooper is translated as on behalf of. And that's I'll show you why that matters in just a minute. So then the next thing that I want to bring up here, I'm going to bring up another screen that I want to show you. It's a different word. It's the other word that matters here. It's the word baptizo. Now, again, if you're looking here in terms of what does the word mean, here's the word baptizo. And as you might expect, most of the time it occurs and is translated as the word baptized, baptized, or baptizes. And then if you want to even throw in this one here, by being baptized. There are just a couple of times, I think it's 2 times that the word occurs as, 2 times that the word occurs as wash. 1 time, I believe, or maybe 2 times that it occurs as being for Baptist. So, and again, I'll show you why that matters in just a moment. But for now, what you need to just see is you need to see that predominantly when the word baptizo is used, it's used to indicate baptize. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to, oops, there we go. So the meaning of this text depends on how you translate those 2 words. Because Paul says, what do people mean by being baptized on behalf of the dead? So you have various options. If you want to look at the word as it's translated, as we just looked at it, what do people mean by being baptized for the dead? What do people mean by being washed on behalf of the dead? What do people mean by being baptized on behalf of or in place of the dead? Those are all the different options that you can start to play with, but you have to then look at what is the most likely one. And so a number of theories begin to emerge, and I'll kind of just go through them for interest's sake. One of the theories that, and these are, I didn't come up with these obviously, but these are theories that are being floated around. So one of the theories that was going around is that Paul is talking about the practice of washing a deceased person. So a person would die, and then you would, the word baptizo would be translated as wash, and you will remember that was one of the possibilities. So it seems that a person was being a deceased person was being washed, and Paul seems to be saying, well, what do we, why are you washing a deceased person if there is no resurrection from the dead? In other words, why are you showing respect to this person's body if you don't believe that there is a resurrection of the dead? That's a possibility theoretically, but that is unlikely. Again, you saw that the word wash only occurs, the word baptizo is only translated as wash probably one, maybe two times. So it's not a very likely translation, and it seems to go beyond what would be the most obvious translation. So if you have a word baptizo and 99 out of 100 times it's translated as baptize, you have to make a really strong case as to why you would make the exception in a given situation. Why would you translate it as wash if that's a very, very infrequent translation of the word? And I just don't think there's textual support or thematic support there to do that. So then another possibility is that Christians were baptizing converts to Christianity, but they had converted on their deathbed, and so they were very near to the point of death. And what they would try to do is quick baptize them before they passed away. And so it's kind of like, well, they're not really technically dead yet, but they're pretty well dying. And so Paul he's saying, he's translating the word on behalf of that word hooper, he's translating it as for. In other words, Paul's saying, what do you mean by baptizing, or what do you mean for baptizing people who are dead but not really dead? Again, I find that very, very unlikely, because when Paul uses that word necros, that's a word that doesn't suggest ill or dying. It's a word that suggests really like absolute complete death. They are dead. And so again, you'd have to make a very strong case to show why the word necros should be translated more like sort of figuratively rather than literally. Here's another theory floating around. Baptizo could mean that people were washing the graves of their loved ones. So they would bury someone, and then they would go and they would wash the grave and treat the grave with respect. And again, that theory depends on translating the word baptizo as wash. And I just don't think there's strong textual support to do that. But Paul's thinking seems to be, you're treating the deceased with a lot of respect and dignity, and why are you doing that? Here's another one. Baptizing the church. It's possible the church was baptizing believers who had new believers, not dead believers, but new believers or even longtime members of the church in place of those who had died. And they did that for the very specific reason of keeping their membership rolls active and alive. So you'd have, maybe Mrs. Smith, who would pass away, and so her name really should come off the membership roster, but we don't want our membership roster to shrink. So let's just baptize someone in her place, and then our membership rolls, it looks like our membership numbers are really strong. To me, that was a theory that's floated. It makes almost no sense to me, because theoretically, your membership rolls, your numbers are going to be, however you count them, your numbers are going to be going down unless you're baptizing new converts, in which case you'd be baptizing new converts and you not be worried about trying to baptize people on behalf of the dead. So that makes almost no sense to me. Another possibility is sort of a metaphorical analogy, and I have to admit I didn't fully understand this when I read it, but the theory goes that people were being baptized. Paul is really saying, look, you're being baptized, you're treating yourself as though you are dead. Why would you be doing that? And Paul is saying, look, I'm willing to die for Christ every day. He goes on to say that in the very next verse. And so Paul seems to be concerned that the believers in Corinth were not willing to be identified with Christ in his death because they wanted to live a relatively comfortable life. That's an interesting theory, but again, I think it strains some credulity to actually get there. It seems like you have to jump through some real exegetical hoops to get there, and I just don't think that's possible. Here's what I think is most likely. I think the word hooper, that word that we talked about, is meant to be translated as on behalf of. And it seems, I think the best understanding is that it seems that there was a practice in the Corinthian church in which a person a new believer might stand in as a sort of substitute for a believer who had died. Maybe you had someone who converted to Christianity, but they did not have the opportunity yet to be baptized. And so what you do is you'd find a living person and you'd have them sort of be a representative for that deceased person. You'd baptize the living person, knowing full well that the person who died was a believer. It's just they hadn't received the sacrament or ordinance of baptism. And so the thinking seems to be that there was this sort of practice that had emerged in the Corinthian church where believers were standing in for deceased believers and it was, the goal was to provide comfort to the family of the bereaved family. It's sort of like, our mother was never baptized, or my husband was never baptized, and I really just want to know that they belong to Jesus, and I want that outward symbol. And so then they would sort of practice this baptism by proxy. Now, what's interesting is that Paul doesn't really say much positively or negatively about this. It seems that he's not overly concerned about the practice, and we can only speculate why. I don't think you can draw a conclusion from this that this would be a legitimate practice for the church today, especially because we know so little about what actually went on. But Paul doesn't. It is important, I think, and it's fair to note that Paul doesn't actually come out and condemn the practice. He doesn't say, you shouldn't be doing this, but he doesn't really affirm it either. He just sort of recognizes that it was going on in the Corinthian church. And Paul's main point in doing that, is his real focal point, his real intent, was to show that there was an inconsistency in the practice of the Corinthians and in their belief. In other words, the Corinthian church was denying the resurrection of the body. They denied the physical resurrection of the body. And what Paul is saying is, okay, if you deny that there's the bodily resurrection of believers, then why are you so concerned about trying to baptize and make sure that they're receiving the benefits of baptism? If their body is just in the ground and gone and their spirit has escaped, then why do you go through all this trouble? So he's highlighting this inconsistency as a way of saying your practice is actually closer to truth than your belief is here. Like you're living as though the resurrection is true. You're just not professing it. And so he's trying to do is because he's challenging the underlying view of the Corinthians that they denied the bodily resurrection. He's trying to challenge that. And sometimes one of the best ways that you can challenge that is by going after an inconsistency in a person's worldview. And it seems that's what Paul is doing. He's saying, look, if you don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, why are you taking steps to benefit those who are deceased? Why are you trying to provide that sort of comfort? So it seems that that's probably what Paul was doing here. It's an interesting little comment. Paul doesn't say a lot about it, but it's kind of interesting, and it gives you a little bit of a window into the life of the early church. Hey, thanks for watching. Always good to share a little bit of time with you. Would you do me a favor and like and subscribe if you haven't done that already? It just kind of helps share the videos around so that more people can benefit from it. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.